Principal funding for Rights and Wrongs, the Human Rights television series, has been provided by the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, the Body Shop Foundation, and the Aaron Diamond Foundation. Globalvision presents a new program on the cutting edge of change. This week, a country where citizens have few rights, where forced labor is common, where protest means prison, even torture. This is China, the world's largest human rights battleground. It's been 4 years since the tanks crushed the dream of democracy in Tiananmen Square. For the first time on television, the personal story of one student leader's rebellion and eventual escape, all filmed secretly inside China. And from Washington, the China debate. Should or shouldn't the United States link trade with China to progress on human rights?
Most favored nation trade status represents the single most important economic and diplomatic leverage the United States can exercise over China.
We will also have a report on torture in an American prison, a shocking report on the street children of Rio de Janeiro. And from Cyprus, Greek women confront Turkish authorities, demanding an accounting for missing relatives. In our culture segment, introducing Sui Jian. His long march to rock and roll made him a hero to the youth of China. All this on Rights and Wrongs, the television magazine of human rights. In New York, Charlene Hunter Galt.
Most of us know little about China. Information doesn't flow freely. Its regime prefers it that way. What we do know is that human rights are not a priority. Economic growth is. China is potentially the biggest market in the world, worth billions. Yet the Clinton administration is now linking China's economic development to progress in human rights. This stand is a result of intense debate between big business and human rights activists. We'll have more on this story in a few minutes. But first, what happened to the students who made their stand for human rights in Tiananmen Square? Who were they, and where are they now? Rights and Wrongs offers the first televised look at a new film shot secretly inside China, which tells a personal story. The director, whose identity we had to conceal, introduces us to Escape from China.
This is the first documentary about Chinese political dissidents' personal life in China. It's the first documentary shot in China by Chinese crew without government censorship. And this is a story about one of 21 student leaders on the most wanted list. His name is Zhang Boli. Here's Escape from China.
I was born into a family of poor peasant class origin. My family taught me that Mao Zedong was our savior. I knew Mao's name even before I knew my father's. One of the first songs I learned was, "However big the sky, it is not as big as the party's loving kindness. And father is dear, and mother is dear, but they are not as dear as Chairman Mao." Whenever I saw Chairman Mao at the movies, I would shed tears of excitement. I was a true believer in socialism and communism. I was also an upstanding Communist Party member. I never imagined that I could become an enemy of the state.
Zhang Boli offers a personal recollection of why he became a leader in the student movement.
On April 15, 1989, Hu Yaobang, the former general secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, died. At the time, I was a student at Beijing University. Hu Yaobang promoted democracy and freedom of speech. Students and professors alike mourned his death. We gathered at the Triangle of Beijing University. Wang Dan asked us how we would like to express our grief. The students wanted to hold a demonstration. Around midnight, we started our march toward Tiananmen Square. This was the first demonstration in Beijing. We formulated a 7-point appeal. The second day, we submitted the petition to the Congress. 10 days later, the People's Daily published the April 26th editorial, denouncing the student movement as a rebellion. In order to force the government to recognize the students' movement as patriotic and to have dialogue with us, we started a hunger strike. I assumed the position of deputy commander of the hunger strike team. We fasted for 7 days without receiving any cooperative response from the government. On May 19th, at midnight, we announced that we would stop the strike and conduct a sit-in demonstration instead. 2 hours later, the Li Peng government proclaimed martial law. On the evening of June 3rd, Tiananmen University of Democracy was established, and I acted as its first president. As I was making a speech, the army marched into the square from the east. All I could hear was the rumble of tanks and crackling bursts from machine guns, like firecrackers. There were more than 20,000 students around me. Seeing things from the platform, I thought my last moment had come. The army surrounded us. I saw a young man carrying a wounded student. As a doctor was trying to dress his wound, I saw a hole in the back of his head. He was dead. I cried, and I felt that I was responsible. June 4th, early morning after the massacre, Chai Ling, Li Lu, Fang Changde, and I led the students who were still in the square back to Beijing University. Some of the students suggested that we organizers should leave immediately. Some said we should leave the country. I said no. I did not believe that in such a huge country with 9,600,000 square kilometers, there would be nowhere for me to go, no way to survive. I couldn't believe that. I fled to Tongxian on a bicycle, and from there I soon got to Tianjin. When I got there, I wandered along the train platform with no idea where to go next, north or south, east or west. On June 13th, Chinese Central Television announced the names of the 21 most wanted student leaders, and I was one of them. From then on, all of the student leaders lived in constant fear of arrest. Wang Dan was arrested. Xiang Yan was arrested. Zhou Fengsuo got caught. Where Kaixi and Li Lu fled the country. I got away to Harbin, a city in the northeast.
Escape from China also introduces us to Zhang Boli's family, to his daughter Little Snow, and his wife, who divorced him during a period of uncertainty.
Little Snow and I stood in the street waiting every day for him to come back. I mistook everyone that came along for my husband. It must be him. Even when my eyes told me it wasn't, my heart still refused to admit it until the person was gone.
The film chronicles Zhang Boli's ordeal, how he was hidden by peasants in the north of China, how he escaped into Russia through a perilous crossing of a frozen river, narrowly surviving, only to be imprisoned and returned to China, but not to the police. Escape from China offers a personal profile, shot at great risk inside China by a courageous Chinese woman. Finally, Zhang Boli made it to the United States via Hong Kong.
I think it was worth it. People shouldn't live only for self-fulfillment. And although we were fighting for our rights as individuals, our efforts were also for the common good. I never expected to lose so much. I wasn't prepared for this. Nevertheless, I would not hesitate to be involved even more deeply if a democratic movement emerges again in China.
In the past few years, an economic revolution has transformed China. But will economic growth alone lead to an open and democratic society? President Clinton's administration will now require progress by Beijing on human rights in exchange for renewal of China's most favored nation trade status. But the issue won't go away, and for now the stakes are high. No representative of either the Chinese or American governments would comment on camera. Our cover story takes us inside the ongoing debate that pits big business interests against pro-democracy activists. At stake, billions of dollars and the quality of 1 billion lives. We begin in Beijing. For 11 years, Liu Qing was imprisoned and tortured for his pro-democracy activism. Last year, he was given a passport and permission to leave China. Today, Liu Qing is in Washington with other human rights activists. He's a man on a mission, continuing to press the Clinton administration to require substantial human rights progress by Beijing as a condition for the renewal of MFN, the lucrative most favored nation trading status.
I think it is necessary and important for the United States and all countries that respect basic human rights to pressure the Chinese government.
Liu Qing is up against a powerful, well-financed opponent, corporate America. Nearly 300 U.S. companies recently sent this letter to President Clinton urging him not to link America's China trade policy to human rights. Don Anderson is president of the U.S.-China Business Council.
China is the fastest growing market in the world at the present time, and there is real concern on the part of American business that measures that we might take, which would produce retaliation from the Chinese side, are going to put us at a very serious competitive disadvantage with the Europeans and with the Japanese.
The majority in Congress say linking human rights to most favored nation status would not harm the U.S.-China trade relationship. They assert that the Chinese do respond to economic pressure. Representative Nancy Pelosi.
They may not like democracy, they may not respect human rights, but they do love and respect money. And I think that they would not be so willing to give up access to the U.S. market at a low tariff.
Political strategist John Sasso advises the Chinese dissidents.
They've shown in the past that when appropriate pressure is applied, that they will respond. Every year about this time, they release some dissidents. They released Professor Fang Lezhu several years ago in response to U.S. pressure. I think they would be shocked if we didn't do it.
Bill Clinton promised to pressure the Chinese on human rights during last year's presidential campaign.
I would be firm. I would say, if you want to continue most favored nations status for your government-owned industries as well as your private ones, observe human rights in the future.
But will China observe human rights in the future? President Clinton is giving Beijing 1 year to make progress. Will Beijing comply? Activists are doubtful, pointing to the lack of free expression, the brutal repression of Tibetan nationalism, forced abortion and sterilization, torture in the prisons, and the existence of a Chinese gulag, where slave labor is used to make products, some of which are exported to the U.S. Harry Wu spent 19 years in a Chinese prison.
All of these prisoners forced to labor. So 10 million, 20 million cheap labor, no pay labor in the coal mine, in the industrial, in the agricultural area to labor. To produce the products not only for the domestic market as well as the international market.
International markets like the United States, which import products like these socks made by slave labor in a Beijing prison.
Prison labor is routinely used and extensively used to produce goods for export to the United States.
Torture is another human rights abuse inside Chinese prisons. Liu Qing described his experience.
They would strike me with a club and electric rods. Sometimes they just beat me with their hands and kick me with their feet. Other times they would hit my palms with keys and other hard objects, and then beat me. They would also whip me with a rope.
The torture of prisoners like Liu Qing will continue to be weighed against the potential to make billions of dollars in China. Mike Jendrzejczyk of Human Rights Watch.
As a human rights organization, clearly we are the David confronting the Goliath. I mean, we do not have the kind of resources nor the kind of economic clout that major corporations can wield. What we do have is a voice of conscience that tries to represent the voices of the Chinese people, those in China and Tibet who are in prison or in other ways repressed.
Hai Chang-jiao is director of the National Council on Chinese Affairs.
We are against a tremendous money power, which is unfortunate because that wasn't something we anticipated, because we thought we are really against a powerful Chinese government, and that's all we have to deal with. And now it turns out that's not the case. The money power on the other side are lobbying heavily and twisting the debate.
The lobbying effort is very intense, and we have member companies coming to Washington or their Washington representatives joining us in discussing this issue with members of Congress, with the U.S. Trade Representative, with the National Security Council, State Department, Department of Commerce, making the case that this is not in U.S. interest.
I've never fully really understood the arguments of the business community in this regard, because it would seem to me that it's in their interest to have some appropriate pressure kept on the Chinese government to continue to make progress on human rights issues. In the absence of that pressure, eventually what you're going to get is social chaos.
Frankly, U.S. corporate America has done very little to promote human rights. They say things to me like, we're in business, we're not in politics. How important are human rights to us? We have an obligation to our shareholders to get goods at the lowest possible price. What difference should it make to them if it's made by prison labor?
It did make a difference to one U.S. company. Levi Strauss recently cut its business ties in China to protest human rights abuses. But most U.S. corporations argue that the best way to influence the Chinese is to continue to do business with them.
The presence of American business and American joint ventures in China producing goods is a factor in improving the human rights situation. We bring a greater openness, we bring a greater concept of questioning procedures and so forth. And a number of American businessmen have been instrumental in improving the human rights situation in China.
The human rights situation in China is a massive disaster. It's of catastrophic proportions, especially since June '89. It's vital that international pressure on Beijing be kept up to bring it to the negotiating table, to make concessions on human rights, to open up the labor camp system to international inspection and scrutiny, to free political prisoners.
1.2 billion people in China don't have the right to express themselves or to think. This is a very important matter.
You are watching Rights and Wrongs, Human Rights Television. Each week at this time, news and global perspectives you don't see elsewhere.
Each week, our Rights Reel features stories and updates from around the world you rarely see elsewhere. We begin this week in the United States with allegations of abusive treatment of prisoners. The jail is in Syracuse, New York.
You are now walking down a county jail cell block in Syracuse, New York, an institution embroiled in a human rights controversy. Prison officials stand accused of physically torturing prisoners with a suspension device when they shackle and restrain them in irons. A local doctor, a member of Physicians for Human Rights, made the original charges.
Some of their body weight was pulling the wrists off of handcuffs that were attached high above the head of the bed.
Dr. James Trevor reached his conclusions after recreating the prison's technique in his basement. He showed us how he did it.
The pain is very severe.
He explained what the suspension system does to prisoners.
I was probably in that position for no more than a minute or two, and here it is. Got a sharp groove that cuts just underneath the thumb. The thumb was entirely numb in some of these cases, and we found numbness on this side as well.
We're not torturing anybody.
After the practice was exposed in a national TV report, The prison indicated it would substitute its suspension device with a new, ostensibly more humane restraint chair. Officials later told National Public Radio that they will continue shackling, unless ordered not to do so by a court that's now hearing a lawsuit from prisoners who claim to have been abused.
These are some of the poverty-stricken children of Brazil. There are 7 million of these street kids forced to fend for themselves at an early age.
Do they know where their parents are?
He said my parents are in a shanty town in the outskirts of Rio.
In schools like this, street educators try to provide services. But often their biggest battle is to keep their kids alive.
It's very hard in the street and it's very violent, and there is the death squads.
We videotaped these kids last year in Rio. The odds are some are no longer alive, says Carlos Becerra, an Ashoka Fellow and street educator.
Every day there are brutal assassinations. Children with their heads cut off, without limbs, burnt alive, shot in the head.
Brazil's National Movement for Street Children estimates that as many as 4 street kids are murdered each day in Brazil. The government puts the figure lower and told us that they are investigating. Becerra told Rights and Wrongs that many of these killings are linked to police and private armies hired by businessmen to clean up the streets. He also claimed that 17% of the cops in Rio have been linked to death squad activity.
The police rob, the police kidnap, the police kill. The only way to fix this problem is to dismantle the police force and start again from zero.
Street educators, also in danger, are now asking for an international tribunal to stop the killing of street children. For Rights and Wrongs, this is Howie Masters.
This Greek Cypriot woman just lost her son, shot to death by a Turkish soldier in the buffer zone that has divided Cyprus since 1974, when 35,000 Turkish troops invaded the northern part of the island, forcibly displacing 200,000 Greek Cypriots and triggering a conflict that claimed thousands of lives.
Nearly 20 years later, those memories are still alive, in demonstrations like this one, led by Cypriot activists crossing the Turkish-imposed border in protest of an occupation that has defied international law. Greek Cypriots have continued to press for an accounting of more than 1,600 victims of the invasion who are still considered missing but suspected dead. This dramatic footage is from Cyprus television.
There is no other country, no precedent in the world of so many missing people, 1,619 people missing for such a long time.
In late May, the president of the Cypriot Republic met with President Clinton as the United Nations takes another stab at resolving the issue. America's military ties to Turkey have been some of the factors in Washington's low profile on the Cyprus issue in the past. Turkey defends its policy, saying the Greeks have their own territorial ambitions. Significantly, leaders of the Bosnian Serbs have pointed to the Turkish occupation of Cyprus as a precedent for their own land grabbing. For Rights and Wrongs, this is Glenn Beatty.
Rights and Wrongs welcomes your written comments and suggestions. You can also order a transcript for $5 or a video cassette for $24.95 by writing to the Global Center, P.O. Box 311, Radio City Station, New York, 10101. Send checks or money orders only. Credit card holders call 1-800-541-2535.
Thank you for watching, and thanks to the many viewers who have written to us with comments and suggestions. Next week, we'll premiere the work of filmmakers who've been living and working under fire in Sarajevo. Their video diaries are powerful testimony to the cruelty of this conflict and the courage of the citizens that endure. We close this week with the music of China's popular singer Sui Zhen, whose songs have become anthems for China's youth. I'm Charlene Hunter-Gault.
不可怜，这不可跟你们不是。